Good morning, dear students. Today we are going to start our new chapter, Consumers Equilibrium, with the help of Indifference Curve Analysis. Dear student, in the previous session we studied about what is consumer equilibrium and what are the different approaches to measure consumer equilibrium. One is cardinal utility approach, another one is ordinal utility approach. So in the cardinal utility we studied about marginal utility approach of measuring consumer equilibrium, like in one commodity case, two commodity case. In this session we will study about consumer equilibrium, okay, with the help of indifference curve analysis. Dear student, you all are familiar that indifference curve analysis, this theory was given by Professor Hicks and Allen, and initially this theory was propounded by Pareto, but later on it is further developed by two great economists, Professor Hicks and Allen. Okay, so they gave the concept of ordinal utility to measure consumer equilibrium, and we all are familiar that in the case of ordinal utility we just rank our utility like higher, lower, middle. So in this particular session we just measure consumers equilibrium with the concept of ordinal utility. Okay, dear student, and we already finished our previous session consumer equilibrium with the help of cardinal utility. Okay student, let's start this chapter. First of all, what is consumers equilibrium? You all are familiar that consumers equilibrium is defined as a situation when he maximizes his satisfaction spending his given income across different goods with the given prices. It is simply known as consumers equilibrium. Okay, in general, if you talk that whenever you heard about this term like consumer equilibrium, always kept in mind that consumer equilibrium means that a consumer is in higher level of satisfaction by spending his income which he have on the market price of the goods and services. So the maximum satisfaction he is getting at that particular point is simply known as consumer equilibrium. Now the assumption of indifference curve analysis of consumer equilibrium, there are assumptions related to every theory and related to every law. So there are few assumptions related to this particular theory of consumer equilibrium with the help of indifference curve. So these assumptions are: first, money income of the consumer is given and does not change. Whatever income you have, it remain constant. There is no change in your money income. Second, the consumer spend his income on two goods which are substitute of each other. Okay, like you can consume any of the two goods, and the two goods which are substitute of each other, like apple, mango, you can substitute like tea and coffee, these type of goods. The third is the consumer preference or the scale of preference for the two good is well defined. It is well defined, so the preference will not change in the particular case of indifference curve. Okay, now generally speaking, his intensity of desire for a good would increase when he has less of it. Okay, likewise his intensity of desire for a good would decrease when he has more of it. Okay, if you have a good which is more in quantity, then your desire for that good is decreased. But if you have a in less in quantity, then your desire for that good increases in the due course of time. Okay, now next is more of good always give more satisfaction to the consumer. This is called monotonic preference for a good. Dear student, this is one of the main important point which you have to keep in mind, so that it will help in our further in our future session. Okay, this is important point, so you have to keep in mind that more of a good always give more satisfaction to the consumer. Okay, when you consume more of a good, okay, it give you more of the satisfaction. This is simply known as monotonic preferences. Okay, suppose you are consuming two good like apple and mango, but there is always one good, and for that particular good you have more desire as compared to the another good like apple and mango. So I like mango little more than as compared to apple, so I consume 5 unit of mango as with respect to 3 unit of apple. Okay, maybe your preference will be different. Suppose you consume 5 unit of apple with 3 unit of mango, so it's depend upon individual to individual. Okay, so this is known as monotonic preference. The last point is the consumer is rational. He always tries to maximize his satisfaction in a given situation. This is also an important point, that every consumer is rational. Like you, like me, we all are rational. We always try to maximize our satisfaction. Okay, and if we think from a producer point of view, so a producer always tries to maximize his profit. but as a consumer we all try to maximize our satisfaction. Okay, now next is indifference set and indifference curve. Dear student, indifference set is basically the combination of two goods. You can see in the definition that indifference set is a set of those combination of two goods which offers the consumer the same level of satisfaction, so that the consumer is indifferent across all combination in the indifference set. This is important point, dear student, that indifference set basically represent the combination of two commodities. In our case we have apple. Okay, dear student, in our case we have apple and oranges. We have apple and oranges, and these are the combination, like set 1 which represented as A, set 2 which represented as B, set 3 and set D. Now set A represented 1 unit of apple and 10 unit of mango. Set B represent 2 unit of apple and 7 unit of mango. So according to consumer, they can consume or they can buy different set according to the preference. Like suppose I like mango, so I will go for the combination A, 10 unit of mango, unit of apple. Okay, and suppose Namrata like C combination, so she will go for 5 unit of mango and 3 unit of apple. So according to consumer the combination may be different, or I can choose any one of the combination like A, B, C and D, but the satisfaction which I receive, okay, by consuming any of the combination is always remain same. Suppose I choose combination A, then the satisfaction I receive received from consuming A combination is same as the satisfaction receiving by consuming D combination. Okay, students, so whatever combination you choose, your level of satisfaction remains same in all the combination of indifferent set. Okay, students, so this graph this table represents our indifferent set with different combination of two commodities, apple and mango. Okay, student, now move to our next point, which is indifference curve. Dear student, when we plot our indifference set in a graph, in a graphical manner, so it becomes an indifference curve. That's why indifference curve is a graphical representation of two commodities. It shows the different combination of two commodities which gives the same level of satisfaction to the consumer. So when you plot these point of apple and oranges and different combination, when you plot these point in your graph, you will find your graph like this. Okay, x-axis represent apple, y-axis represent oranges, then you put their quantities like 1 2 3 4. Similarly you plot quantity of oranges starting from 0 2 4 6. Okay, then you join those points and you will get point A, which is your first combination, B, C, D. Okay, like this. So by joining all these points you will get an indifference curve. So this is your indifference curve, which shows the different combination of two commodities, and this indifference curve is negatively sloped downward and it is convex in the nature. Okay, indifference curve is convex in the nature. Okay, dear student, now the definition of indifference curve. Indifference curve is a diagrammatic presentation of an indifference set of a consumer, which I told you that with the help of indifference set you can draw indifference curve. Okay, student, it is a locus of all such point which shows different combination of two goods like apple and orange in our case, offering the same level of satisfaction to the consumer. As I told you, the same level of satisfaction to the consumer. Okay, whatever quantity or whatever combination you prefer in the indifference curve, the satisfaction you receive from every point of in the indifference curve is same, like point A, point D. The level of satisfaction received at point A is same as the level of satisfaction received in point D. Okay, student, that's why it is downward sloping. This is because the monotonic preference. Okay, the basic reason for the downward sloping of the indifference curve is monotonic preferences, which we study in our next session. Okay, student, now let's move to our next part, which is properties of indifference curve. So before starting this part, first little bit we can revise that initially we discussed about consumer equilibrium. After that, assumptions of consumer equilibrium is clear. Now indifference set, we have cleared the concept of indifference set. Now with the help of indifference set we can draw indifference curve. Okay, and indifference curve, you all are familiar that indifference curve shows the different combination of two goods. Okay, and every point of the indifference curve give you same level of satisfaction. Okay, dear student, now next is properties of indifference curve. What are the different properties of indifference curve? The first property is IC slope downward, which you can see in our diagram that indifference curve is downward sloping. Okay, which you can easily find in figure number 2. Indifference curve downward sloping from left to right, and it has a negatively slope. Why indifference curve is downward sloping and it has a negative slope? The reason is very simple. The indifference curve shows the different combination of two goods, and it also tells us that when you have to consume more of one commodity, you have to sacrifice one of the commodities. Suppose in case if you want to buy more of oranges, you have oranges and apple. Suppose you wish to buy 10 unit of apple, and at this point you are consuming 5 unit of orange, and you wish to buy 12 unit of apple. So you have to compromise with oranges, and you are going to buy 4 unit of oranges. So if you want to increase consumption of one commodity, you have to sacrifice with another commodity. That's why it is negatively sloped downward. Okay, dear student, and this the basic reason is monotonic preference for the IC curve slope downward. Always keep in your mind that the basic reason for downward sloping of indifference curve is monotonic preferences, that more of a good always give him more satisfaction. Monotonic preference means that more of a good always give him means consumer, more satisfaction, so that when the consumer move from point A to point B in our curve, so his satisfaction level for apple must rise. Okay, dear student, that's why it is downward sloping. You can see in our diagram that if a consumer is consuming at point A, it simply means he is taking 5 unit of oranges and 2 unit of apple. When he switch towards the B point, it simply represents that he reduces the consumption of oranges like 5 to 3, and he increases the consumption of apple from 2 to 3. So this represents that when if you have to increase the consumption of one commodity, you have to sacrifice the other commodity. This is known as indifference curve sloping downward. By this, indifference curve is sloping downward, and the basic reason is monotonic preference. Okay, student, now in this particular part you can see the slope of indifference curve. Okay, the slope of indifference curve represents by delta y divided by delta c, which is the slope of IC is delta y divided by delta c. This delta y represents the sacrifices of good y, and this delta y represents the gain of gain of good x. So you all are familiar that in case if you want to increase the consumption of one good, like if you want to increase the consumption of good x, like this, increasing the consumption of good x from 2 units to 3 units, you have to sacrifice few unit of good y. Okay, that's why in good y the consumer have to sacrifice 2 unit, and he will switch from 5 to 3. So this represents the delta y change in the y good, and delta x represents the change in x good. So so by this we can plot our slope of indifference curve is delta y upon delta x. Okay, student, now our next point is IC is convex to the origin. Indifference curve is convex to the origin. Okay, as I told you in the starting of my video that indifference curve is convex by nature. Okay, this is decline in as we know that indifference curve is negatively sloped downward. Okay, it is sloping downward, it is convex in the nature, and the basic reason is MRS, which is marginal rate of substitution. This is the basic reason of convexity of the indifference curve. Okay, which is MRS, and this is MRS is also known as the slope of indifference curve. Okay, slope of indifference curve is also known as MRS, marginal rate of substitution. Okay, this definition is very important from exam point of view, that MRS refers to the rate at which the consumer is willing to substitute one good for the other. So this represents the rate of substitution by which you are going to substitute one good for another. If you wish to buy more of oranges, you have to sacrifice with apple. If you wish to buy more of apple, you have to sacrifice some amount of oranges. So this particular slope or this particular change okay, is represented by MRS, marginal rate of substitution. That's why IC is convex to the origin, because of declining or diminishing MRS. Okay, always keep in mind that because of declining or diminishing MRS, marginal rate of substitution. Dear student, there is a one case. If your MRS is increasing, then your indifference curve is not in convex in shape, then it is concave in shape. And if your MRS is constant, then your indifference curve is constant in shape. Okay, we will discuss it in our next video, in our latter part. Okay, first we have to understand that IC is convex to the origin because of MRS, which is marginal rate of substitution. Okay, dear student, so marginal rate of substitution is also known as slope, as I told you. Okay, so we can see in the diagram that how can we calculate our marginal rate of substitution. According to the question, we have x unit of the common, we have x a good which is known as x, another we have the second good which is y. Okay, mango, apple, you can take anyone. Then we have the units of different commodities like x and y, we have different units of these commodity. Then the changes in these commodities, okay, the sacrifice in these commodities. Okay, when we divide delta y is divided by delta x, then we can easily get MRS, marginal rate of substitution. In the first case, you can see that 2 and 6 they remain constant, there is no change, that's why it is dash. In the second case, good x, okay, a new commodity produces 3, and in the case of y we have to sacrifice few good from 6 to 4.5. So the difference between 3 to 2 is 1, and the difference between 4.5 to 6 is 1.5. So 1.5 divided by 1 is minus 1.5. This is our MRS, marginal rate of substitution. Delta y divided by delta x, whatever change in y, when you divide that change with the change in x, you will get easily your MRS. Next time, when in case of good x, we move from third unit to fifth unit and 4.5 to 3, the difference between the both, we will get 1.5 divided by 2, which is 0.75. Okay, by doing this you will easily get your MRS, marginal rate of substitution, change in good y divided by change in good x. Okay student, and when you plot, you will get your indifference curve is negatively sloping downward in convex shape. Okay student, now why should MRS declining? MRS is declining because when you have to consume more of one commodity, you have to sacrifice another commodity, then only you can produce more of another commodity, or you can consume more of another good. That's why MRS is declining in nature. Okay, and it is represented by delta y upon delta x. Next is higher indifference curve shows higher level of satisfaction. This is also one of the important point, that suppose we have different indifference curve 1, 2, 3 and 4. Okay, always keep in mind that higher the indifference curve, higher the level of satisfaction. Okay, suppose you are lying at point indifference curve 4, this, so this point A which is on IC4, this is always give you more satisfaction as compared to point B which is on IC1. Suppose this is point B, so A point always give you more satisfaction as compared to point B, because higher the indifference curve, higher the level of satisfaction. Okay student, so always keep in mind that indifference curve case, higher the level of IC, higher the level of satisfaction. Second is IC needs not to be parallel to each other. It is not compulsory that your indifference curve needs to be parallel to each other, they are never parallel to each other. But the next point is indifference curve never touches or intersect each other. Although it's not compulsory that the both all the curves is parallel in shape, but they never intersect like this, they never intersect each other, or they never touches each other like this. If you have the like this, they never touches each other and they never intersect each other. Okay dear student, so This is the third property of indifference curve. The next is IC curve do not touches or intersect each other, which I told you that two indifference curve never touches each other like this. They never intersect each other, they never touches each other. If they touch each other, like in this case, suppose IC1 intersect IC2. In this case, they intersect at point A, and when we plot a line, we get 2 points, point B and point C. Okay, in this, by this intersection, we can easily draw a conclusion that if A equals to B, then B equals to C. A equals to B and our B equals to C in this case, then A must be equal to C according to mathematics rule. If A equals to B and B equals to C, then A equals to C, A equals to C. But this is not possible, because you can see A and C never be equal, because they are in the same indifference curve, which is IC2. So this simply represents that two indifference curve never intersect or touches each other. Okay, student. And our last point of our properties of indifference curve is that IC does not touches x-axis and y-axis. This is one of the important point you have to keep in mind, that indifference curve never touches your x-axis and never touches your y-axis. Okay, this is because we all know that indifference curve is the combination of two commodity. Okay, like we have orange and we have apple. If your indifference curve touches your y-axis, suppose you are consuming 60 unit of good Y, and in case of apple you are consuming 0 units, so it is not possible, because there should be certain amount. That's why it shows the combination of two good, so it's not possible. Similarly, in the second case, if your indifference curve, we have orange and apple, if you are consuming 60 unit of apple and 0 unit of orange, then this case is also not possible, because you are spending all your money in the consumption of apple, which is not possible. You have to consume two commodities. That's why indifference curve does not touches x-axis and y-axis. So student, that's it for today. Okay, in the next video we will discuss about consumer budget. Okay student, till now stay safe, stay healthy at your home. Thank you student.